Hi, everyone. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for the generous talk. The British sentiment was kind of a blip in my art history career, but it shows that you can study and write about anything, right? I want to thank you all for attending this talk today, and I'd also like to thank Dr. Evan Gotti and Dr. Kirsten Ringelberg for extending the invitation to participate in the Art History Speaker Series, and to the Department of History and Geography here at Elon for hosting this event.
Is it working?
No.
I might have to quick hold on a second. I see a thing. Okay, try now. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. This project explores creativity within urban art and the everyday in Africa by way of Nairobi, Kenya. Beyond the creative expressions by working visual artists, which come from their own individual and shared experiences living in the city, I focus on the opportunities these artists make for their communities to express their own creativity. Following Forster's quote, as you can see on the screen, this creativity only comes through self and collective agency, the visibility of social actors within the city, which directly affects their ability to imagine and construct new urban futures. To restore agency to their communities, these artists, I argue, are interested in placemaking as a critical practice for social belonging, self-empowerment, and even emancipation. My consideration of artistic practices addresses how these artists make places, how being a very basic or simple yet important question within the field of art history. In any visual analysis, you are going to ask how. So how these artists make places, which is a question that scholars of contemporary art in Nairobi have only begun to address. The city is not the setting for this project, but rather a contributing actor in the everyday making of lived experiences. The city is a meshwork of relationships, interchanges, and transactions among people, the built environment, material, and visual culture. Thus, it is dynamic and consistently shifting and reorganizing. Within human geography, scholars tend to agree on the symbiosis occurring between the city and those who live in it. This idea is underscored by African urban theorists like Abdul Malik Simone, who argue that African cities in particular are organized through social transactions amongst its diverse communities as forms of self-determination within urban environments, despite historical, systematic, and political restrictions that disenfranchise these communities. The city is a living ecosystem that is co-produced by those living in and thinking about it, but it is also a built environment of architecture, visual, and material culture that also contributes to our own subjectivities and how we navigate urban spaces. For many who consider Nairobi home, the concept of place takes political and social resonance as it relates to social inequalities that are the result of ongoing land issues and infrastructural disparities within this urban environment. Injustices stemming back all the way to British occupation. Given this, place is the focus for a diverse group of artists in the cities, with works ranging from two-dimensional compositions to public installations and social interventions, all of which interrupting the state's systematic control, construction, and distribution of city spaces through the creation of new places. And so, to kind of ground us a little bit, space and place, I'm gonna say a lot in this talk, and what do I necessarily mean by that? So for me and how I'm going to think about it, I do consider space to be something that is socially constructed, right? And that it exists on multiple registers, so we perceive space, we conceive of space, like representations of space, but we also live in space, right? Our bodies are in space and feel space, right? I consider places as temporary expressions or forms of social organization or mobilization that activates these qualities of spaces, right? That makes us think about these spaces, but then, as I argue, holds the potential to transform these spaces. My dissertation attends to the ways such artists are conceptualizing place and how their approaches work towards social critique, community building, and self-representation. I argue that these artists share a critical practice in placemaking through which they implement strategies of play, storytelling, and critique to activate their work within Nairobi communities as shared expressions of emplacement and belonging. Specifically, I consider the work of artists including Wambui Kamiru, whose work is exhibited here, Peterson Kamwathi, the collective Masai and Billy, Dennis Mugari, Ellis Mungora, Michael Soy, and what I will be talking about today, SlumTV. I focus on artworks that were exhibited, performed, and enacted from the early 2000s to the present, a period undergoing significant urban development through Kenyans Vision 2030, as well as ongoing political unrest, including protests in informal settlements, which has led and continues to lead to police brutality and destruction of physical space. I conduct on-site field work in Nairobi where I interview artists, visit their studios, exhibitions, and screenings. I also perform visual analysis on the artworks and performances, as well as textual analysis of the artist's archives. To frame my discussion, I draw on space and place theory, psychogeography, urban and visual culture studies, as well as the sociology of art. As I turn to SlumTV and their work in Mathare, I want you to think and imagine yourselves as placemakers. We create places, real, imagined, and remembered in so many ways, small, perhaps, but intimately personal. How do you make places? What are the qualities of the places that you like to make? How do you make places with others, be it loved ones or colleagues, classmates? What are your shared desires for those places, and how do you achieve them together? Placemaking must not be examined only for its product, but most importantly as a practice, one that can interrupt everyday flows of life. The practice of making places has gained serious attention in academic and popular discourse, and is argued for its political potential in grassroots activism, social justice, and community development. Elon University participates in placemaking through various ways, but the one that I have listed is with organizations like the Power and Place Collaborative, which is working with and dedicated to sharing this diverse stories of Alamance County. A shared interest in placemaking among local, national, and global actors seems even more important now as our country, and by extension our world, continue to grow more precarious, or continue to grow in which living conditions are based on insecurity, fragmentation, disassociation, and uncertainty, conditions of neoliberal capitalism. Precarious spaces are those, quote, perceived as unstable, unsettled, and relatively unmapped or less visible, end quote. The African city, through its informal and improvised makings and remakings, exhibit the conditions that make them precarious. By focusing on one African city, Nairobi, and within a dense yet comparatively poor part of that city, Mathare, what can SlumTV teach us about precarity and vulnerability? So, in 2006, Sam Hopkins created participatory project based in Mathare, which is a collection of informal settlements or squatter settlements in Nairobi, located just northeast of the central business district. The CBD, quite literally, is the center of the city, and so it is just northeast of that center. Through the collaboration with Vienna-based artists Barbara Huser, Michael Lampert, Alexander Nikolic, and Lucas Pusch, Hopkins developed SlumTV, a video production company that sought to share stories of the lives, experiences, and desires of Mathare communities. Through technology and digital media, SlumTV teaches young people how to write and produce their own stories. With enough interest, SlumTV had its first public screening in 2007 with over 1,000 people from the community in attendance. The videos presented included sitcoms, short sketches, dramas, and documentaries, all of which were set in Mathare and used local actors or local residents as actors. Though SlumTV has limited their outdoor screenings today, instigated primarily by the global pandemic, they continue to work with creators to produce videos and other media projects that are shown throughout Nairobi and for various and diverse audiences. Mathare's location in the city has historically impacted the lives of those residing in the settlements. Current estimates list the population of Mathare to be over 500,000, with about 68,000 persons per square kilometer. Mathare is also surrounded by city and state law enforcement, with the Pangani police station on the southwest side, Muthaiga and Mathare Police Station on the west, Driving Police Post to the north, Huruma Police to the east, and the Kenyan Air Force to the south. So maybe it doesn't need to be said, but such placement makes Mathare extremely vulnerable to heightened surveillance and police presence. In 2020, there were reported 147 deaths due to extrajudicial executions by police, according to Mathare Social Justice Center. Going back to 2007, the MSCJ has reported 756 deaths of primarily young men. With such neglect and abuse from the state and city, with such neglect and abuse from the state and city, many in Mathare are left to alternative resources, social networks, and infrastructures to meet their needs. Through various actors working across multiple registers, Mathare remains precarious as a particular place of living that demands flexibility, ingenuity, resilience, and even revolt, because it has historically and systematically been denied the opportunity to thrive and develop. Moreover, it remains stigmatized within urban and national and global representations, all of which can stereotype the identity of Mathare and its position as a place within the rest of the city and the wider world. And still, for some who live in and grew up in Mathare, it is known, to quote Samuel Gathanga Ndungu, an urban bastion of anti-oppression struggle. It was a critical base for the Kenyan Land and Freedom Army, also known as the Mau Mau, and a place where they and other anti-colonialist groups gathered to strategize, provide weapons and supplies, and to take care of fighters facing arrest. Mau Mau's spirit of resistance continues to flicker within the communities of Mathare, as there is a rise in social justice and other cultural activist groups in the settlements. These organizations, such as MSJC, as I mentioned, but as also Mathare Green Movement and also Mathare Youth Sports Associations, work to protest for better living conditions and against oppression, educate the youth in their local and national histories of resistance, and provide resources for community health and well-being. As another form of cultural activism, SlumTV, with its video productions, screenings, and other digital forms of storytelling, touches on the same issues raised by other social justice groups and seeks to bring awareness to these issues through the creative capabilities of digital technology. Since its beginnings, SlumTV identifies their primary audience to be the local residents of Mathare. They seek to create and produce work of, for, and by Mathare. Hopkins wanted to create a group that could reimagine the stories, experiences, and trials of those living in the settlement through film, and to share these stories back to the communities from which they come. Doing so, the collective worked against many popular depictions of Kenyan slums by outside media, what Sam Hopkins calls considers part of the NGO aesthetic, which I'll talk a little bit about. The stories that SlumTV shares subvert dominating narratives of slum life by amplifying the voices of those living in and experiencing Mathare each and every day. The collective prioritizes technological media like film, radio, and photography to share their stories intentionally, as those technologies offer unique properties for creative expression and transmission. Through technological and digital media, I argue that SlumTV provides an infrastructure for storytelling, from training, production, to distribution. Their work exists across multiple spaces, real, imagined, and virtual, and the stories shared by artists and participants communicate many different senses of personal place. Storytelling is more than just a creative process of producing plot, characters, and dialogue. It is also an intimate expression of lived experience and feeling. Annika Lems beautifully describes storytelling as, quote, the means through which we bring our inner world out and take the outer world into the present, end quote. And this offers the opportunity for our internal landscapes to morph and to enmesh within the external worlds. There is power in sharing these inner places and experiences, not only for the storyteller, but for those listening, that the private inner world is made present and shared with others, allowing us to, quote, overcome our separateness, to rework reality, end quote. Creating and sharing stories is a generative process that has the potential to ignite collaboration and sustain transformation. SlumTV recognizes the power of storytelling, not only for the author, but for the community audiences that engage with these stories through film. Throughout the collective's work, they remain steadfast on sharing the stories of Mathare as a form of activism that brings people together and makes them critically aware of different urban experiences. Moreover, these stories seek to remember, reimagine, and introduce new ways of understanding Mathare, which are then represented into the communities to instigate processes of self-recognition and social belonging. The infrastructure that SlumTV provides is multifaceted, with 4 primary services established: training, production, distribution, and project consulting. What began as a few international artists teaching a small group of Mathare youth to make videos has turned into and evolved into an arts organization that is now run solely by veteran students and local intellectuals and creatives. And it still aims to produce and co-produce various media content. Many of the projects that SlumTV takes on are led by students and senior staff, either as individual or collective work, commissioned and non-commissioned. Distribution of their work ranges in scale, from the original outdoor screenings to large screening events in venues like Alliance Française and the Goethe Institute in downtown Nairobi. Given the organizational structure of SlumTV, I will be referring to the works that I talk about today as by SlumTV, but I will note when there are individual artists. So I want to focus on 2 approaches of storytelling that demonstrate the qualities of places made by SlumTV. I argue that the collective critically designs socio-technological spaces in which the community comes together through the discursive practice of sharing stories. I define socio-technological as an expansive range of interactions between society and technology that move us beyond physical spaces into the virtual. The outdoor screenings connect community with film in Mathare, just as the radio shows and podcasts and online material connect Mathare to a wider world. First, we visit the outdoor screenings that began with SlumTV's first cohort of filmmakers. As an experience of engaging with media together with the community, I trace how these screenings bring together perceived, conceived, and lived spaces. From there, we will look at SlumTV's radio broadcast, Pausa Salty, and its digital format to consider how the collective's placemaking extends into digital, virtual, and cyberspace. Starting in 2007, SlumTV began to screen various films by their first cohort, and the collective aimed at hosting a screening every month. The primary location used was an open field in Mathare, at the time mostly used as a soccer field, but on the off chances that it was open, they used it as a screening site. And this space was organized only with a projector and a portable screen. Once the film begins, after people have arrived and pay just a very minimal fee of 10 shillings, which is very, very small, it's pennies. This open part of Mathare becomes a movie theater, right? It becomes a place in which people come together and watch together. There are no physical boundaries or barriers delineating this space, and in fact, it's really interesting. There's a cohort of Mathare adults who are the so-and-so monitors of these spaces, and they kind of parole the perimeters to make sure that people are not being too rambunctious, I suppose. So it is only controlled through these kinds of social connections. In thinking through the transformative capabilities of SlumTV's screenings, I draw from Azu Nwagbogu's concept of critical design, quote, a speculative and theoretical approach that questions commonly held notions about the role of objects, and I'm going to add images to this, in daily life, and the role that events play in our interpretation and understanding of the contemporary moment, end quote. Essential to critical design is the production of discourse, or the social process of making meaning. The stories shared through films are particular articulations of Mathare that constitute the structured totality that can come through discursive practice. I want to emphasize again that this discourse is shaped not only through the stories presented, but the technological, social, and spatial forms SlumTV creates with each screening. The place of SlumTV screenings are a strategic and participatory mobilization of local resources, creativity, and what Sarah Nuttall and Achille Membe call cultural economy. At the screenings, Mathare is reimagined through video, which is represented to the community, blending reality and imagination together, creating a momentary but palpable expression of place that encourages the audience to consider how they understand Mathare as well as their relationship to it. Each screening consisted of multiple videos, a mixture of a few short documentaries before naturally or usually a longer feature-length film. Again, regardless of genre, all of the videos are united by their focus on Mathare. All of the videos are set in Mathare and use Mathare residents as local actors or as actors in the films. The audience for these screenings only constitute a part of the dynamic and diverse Mathare communities, but it is still a diverse group of people that come together for any number of reasons, right? Whether they are connected to SlumTV or anyone affiliated with SlumTV, or very really, people just walk on by, right? And decide to stop and watch. By controlling where and how these videos were seen, SlumTV maintains its core mission to inspire their immediate community by reclaiming their own abilities to share stories. Whereas dominating narratives on informal settlements, which often abide by the NGO aesthetics as I described, will spread their content to reach national and global audiences, often with the hope to raise money. SlumTV focuses on those in Mathare whose lives are being represented by those foreign narratives, reclaiming their agency and their ability to tell their own versions of those stories. Since the screenings of the early years, SlumTV has expanded their reach and audience by distributing their work to larger urban networks as well as digital platforms. But in doing so, they continue to foreground Mathare stories. SlumTV holds the core belief that through the camera, one is able to create their own stories of dreams, survival, and passion. The technological apparatus becomes a lens in which younger artists view and perceive their community and then represent those realities. Documentaries at a screening will range from small moments like the life of a potato seller to the impacts of national crisis, such as the violently contested presidential election of 2008. Yet others use their lived experiences and interactions within the community as inspiration for new and imagined stories about their home and their place within it. Jonathan Ong, in his study on London-based Filipino migrants and their recognitional experiences of news and entertainment, finds that both fictional and non-fictional media are, quote, all implicated in issues of identity formation and belonging, end quote, that migrants then can use to weave in and out of their own feelings of being part of a broader urban networks and as well as national and international communities. If the camera is a tool for storytelling, a tool to bring forth our inner worlds, then I imagine the screen must be understood as a tool for recognition. Though not because it necessarily depicts or imagines the realities of the filmmakers, but because it visually places those realities within the real spaces of Mathare. In other words, these stories represent Mathare in distinct ways that can align with, complicate, or even transform how the community audiences understand their home and their place to it, or in it. So, let's look at some films. The film Last Drop examines the very real concern over access to water through the journey of a young girl, Emma, who is put in care of her ailing mother. The family has run out of water, and we spend the entire film following the journey of Emma trying to fill at least one cup for her mother. She first asks a neighbor, but is quickly dismissed, and so in an act of desperation, the young girl begins to fill a cup of muddied rainwater before another woman stops her from doing so. She visits a local kiosk owner, but realizes she doesn't have enough money for a bottle of water. Eventually, our protagonist meets another little girl who decides to help purchase water for Emma and her mother. Emma goes back home to give water to her mother, but in a quite dramatic fashion, her mother, in the time elapsed, has passed away. The film ends with this harrowing scene of the young girl grieving for her deceased mother, and we are left unknowing her outcome. Access to water in Mathare and other informal settlements is one of the many real issues that conform to the narratives and representations constructed by NGOs and other charitable industry and the charitable industrial complex at large. So while it is true that this kind of media amplifies and draws awareness to these issues, the NGO aesthetic set forth by these media conglomerates often reduces and stigmatizes these communities as passive and perpetually in need. Last Drop could be argued as a derivative of this same NGO aesthetic because it may coincide with how global audiences are cognitively mapping slums, or how they imagine slums to be. In an interview, Hunkins discusses how the interest in these subjects have permeated through the subconscious of Mathare dwellers. And this is a block quote. "We went around asking people what we should make films about. For the first 6 months, you'd always have someone who'd put their hands up and say, 'I want to make a film about water and sanitation. I want to make a film about HIV and AIDS.' These are important issues, but what struck me is that the way they're referred to, adopting the capitalized discourse over the NGO world. It makes sense that people in Mathare are concerned about their health, their well-being, and ability to exist in contemporary Nairobi, and that these anxieties are reflected in the stories. But what makes these narratives different from the dominating narratives produced by outside NGOs and other media companies is that the position and the perspective in this film is centered on Emma, right? We are looking through the story, we are learning about this issue through the eyes of this little girl. While this film is concerned with the very real issue of water insecurity in Nairobi's informal settlements, Last Drop does not document this problem in an observational way, but imagines the lived experiences of a young girl affected by it. A story like the one in Last Drop captures a shared reality in the limitations and potential dangers in accessing water in Mathare. Formal infrastructure is scarce, with an average of 315 to 1,500 people per water tap. The water accessible from these taps at times is dangerous to consume, and so this leads most people to turn to alternatives. They could buy their water, though this adds a reoccurring expense. Through Emma's journey, Last Drop represents a Mathare entangled within these real living conditions around water that affect real lives. It is through this representation in which Emma intimately suffers and through which she must navigate to see her mother. Interweaving lived and imagined situations in the reality of Mathare is an important component of SlumTV's generative practice because it adds layers to the conception of Mathare as place. We have imagined places enmeshed with the real places felt, lived, and perceived by those in attendance of these screenings. By complicating place in such a way, SlumTV creates a public opportunity for critical awareness that focuses on their place in and of Mathare and how they imagine it. Another example to think through this is the film The Forbidden Fruit, directed by Sami Nakatari in 2015. This film is a 45-minute film, and it is essentially a Romeo and Juliet story between two young individuals, and it follows the relationship of Stephen and Amelina. The forbidden fruit focuses on their love in conflict when Stephen is diagnosed with an unspecified yet highly fatal disease. Amelina vows to stay with him despite his health, but her mother objects, and as she believes Stephen's illness is contagious and will affect her daughter. After a confrontation by Amelina's mother to Stephen and his family, he faints and is taken to the hospital. Amelina is able to come to Stephen's side, expressing her sincere love before he passes away. The film moves us across public and private spaces of everyday life in Mathare, from homes to doctors' offices, as well as public and liminal spaces like storefronts and streets. When The Forbidden Fruit released, SlumTV had at that point in 2015 had been co-producing the Slum Film Festival in Mathare and Cabrera. This is a co-sponsorship with the Italian embassy, interestingly. And the Slum Film Festival still exists, so that's something to check out. This festival, which began in 2012, holds multiple screenings of films produced by and for the communities of these informal settlements, specifically Mathare and Cabrera. Cabrera is the largest slum in Nairobi. And those, held, great. So this screening is located right off of Juja Road in an open field in which you can see a dense network of informal housing stops against this open space that meets against the walls of a 2-story brick building, where the screen is placed in front of. Forbidden Fruit, given its length, would probably feature at the end of this screening, following a series of shorts ranging in style and subject matter, all set in and about Mathare. The places imagined in The Forbidden Fruit, in addition to the places imagined in the other films, are all coming together, entangled with the real and lived places felt by those in attendance. First, the films themselves offer new and imaginative ways of thinking about Mathare. And then, as these films premiere in an outdoor theater, which again, itself a constructed space, those in attendance witness these new versions, these new places presented on screen while adopting that into their own understandings of their sense of place, their sense of home. Mathare, in other words, the screening site as a collective space to view SlumTV conceptually redefines the place of Mathare because it is a place in which local artistic expression is celebrated and magnified, and a place in which the local community is able to witness the potentiality of themselves in their home. In their study of representation and recognition in mass media, Rusli M. Maya and collaborators argue that any change that comes from media creation and circulation must include potential transformation that comes from recognitional responses. When we consider how audiences SlumTV recognize themselves and their communities through watching these films, then we can begin to understand how SlumTV is strategically designing these screenings as a socio-technological phenomena. 2022, under the leadership of SlumTV's current head director, Pauline Njau, the collective began their first radio broadcast, which turned into a podcast, on 99 Coach FM, which focused on local stories. Paza Salti Radio, as the name defines, raises the voices of urban refugee women who have migrated to Mathare. Stories that, quote, surprise, shock, inform, and inspire you, end quote, are gathered and retold by individual refugees who face and live through these experiences. Like the Camera School, which trains a young cohort of people in film production, Paza Salti is an organized training program for urban refugee women in media production. The project began with an open call for women who have left their home country and are resettled in Mathare or the Eastlands, and who have a passion to tell their stories about their experiences making Nairobi home. Those selected took classes in storytelling, audio recording, and editing to produce their own radio programming. Themes for these shows range from education, emigration and living in exile, gender violence, health, and education. Pazza Salti began as a film and radio project and settled into a radio broadcast and podcast series when partnering with Coach FM. With a station in Korochio, Coach FM broadcasts to a wide part of eastern Nairobi, which allowed Pazza Salti to reach a larger audience. The radio series aired through January of 2023 and into February, and now lives on SlumTV's online archive. Each radio show is created by one woman in the cohort and utilizes a variety of storytelling techniques, such as interviews as well as dramatizations. Guests on the program include other women refugees, some connected to the host and some not, as well as activists, scholars, and public service professionals working with and for urban refugees. For example, Pazza Salti's final broadcast was called Livelihoods, directed and hosted by Makdis Meles, who is originally from Ethiopia and relocated to Kenya in 2007. Meles weaves together interviews with other women refugees with her own experiences of displacement when she emigrated from the Bale region of Ethiopia and relocated to this informal settlement. Her interview with Vincent Wanioke, the project coordinator for Livelihoods, sponsored by the Jesuit Refugee Service, discusses some of the barriers that refugee women face as they try to build a life in Nairobi. The last segment reports on life for refugees in African cities, detailing resources from JRS and other nonprofits available to those experiencing displacement. The entire radio broadcast and podcast switches between languages. In the initial interview, Mele translate Oromo, which is an Ethiopian language, into Swahili. Mele shares her own stories primarily in Swahili. However, when she conducts her interview, she switches between Swahili and English. And her interview with Wanioke he primarily speaks in English. And so there is a rich discourse on radio and its place within African histories of socio-technological connections, especially during the late colonial period. Frantz Fanon traces how radio, what was a tool for the French imperialist, became symbolic form of subversion and resistance for the Algerian national movement. Other scholars have argued for the similar efficacy in colonial Angola, as well as apartheid South Africa. While radio as symbolic form for political mobilization is important to my analysis of Pazza Salti, I do not have enough time today to enter into that discussion. So instead, I want to emphasize one crucial aspect to radio and podcasting that is guiding how I'm thinking through it, and that is its ability to connect despite its immateriality. In fact, the dissolution of stories into sound, which makes any physical properties completely invisible and transmits it across wide distances, is in large part why groups like the Algerian national movement valued radio telecommunications. In this way, radio, but essentially sound, is a form of communication that moves through and within different groups of people in different social spaces. This fluidity is not too dissimilar to the ways in which Ephantus Kariku, who is a SlumTV veteran artist as well as an educator, understands his own subjectivity through his position within the city's socio-economic ordering. As he says, it is the urban poor living and making in informal spaces that are best able to adapt in cities like Nairobi. The forced disenfranchisement felt by those living in areas like Mathare demand the capability to be creative, switch between social roles and codes as a tool for self-reliance and security. The ways in which these grifters, or obange in Shang is a slang of Swahili and English, obange, meaning grifter, these grifters move through urban social spaces. The ways in which these grifters move through urban social spaces mirrors a certain ephemerality that comes with radio and sound art. In Obange, a sound installation by artist Kivo Stero, which you can see some stills on the screen, who is an original member of Kibera-based artist collective Masai and Billy. That's a whole other conversation I'd love to have, but I can't today. He uses radio as a tool to conceptually map the city of Nairobi. Audio recordings from local radio broadcasts, local radio stations, are transmitted through small radios and other audio equipment placed in certain neighborhoods, quote unquote, constituting an experiment with how the despatialized nature of sound can manifest and move within the confined space in one of Nairobi's oldest and most popular shopping malls. Stereo equates the movement of sound with the movement of obange, as these social vagabonds develop their own ways of navigating and thus mapping their city. Sound, through its immateriality, can extend beyond the city, of course, into the social spaces of a global scale, by bridging the connections outside of geographic specificity. It forms new networks of social connection that create entirely new senses of place. One that entangles the places represented in the stories with the senses of place, real and virtual, in which people are listening. Using radio, like the camera, is a deliberate choice for SlumTV as a way to amplify the voices of urban women refugees in Mathare to wider audiences within the city and worldwide. Digital media allows SlumTV to physically connect people through sound while circumventing the need to ground their audience in a specific location. The podcast, as well as the archive and its social media and the collective social media presence, also invites us as the audience into cyberspace, providing new audiences, new connections between audiences, as well as new formal and discursive tools for placemaking. And that leads me back to this idea of precarious spaces that I mentioned earlier. Scholars who theorize on precarious spaces draw from Judith Butler's writings on precariousness and vulnerability. Precariousness is a shared condition of human existence, differentiated in the forms of vulnerability experienced among individuals, but still universal as a collective phenomena of our times that disrupts notions of identity, citizenship, and emplacement. Even though precarity is articulated differently for different people, a shared sense of vulnerability is, as Butler argues, a defining characteristic of a new global community. In the age of new media, technology, and the way it mediates in our lives, magnifies our shared precarity through the proliferation of information, images, and stories, while the despatialized nature of the internet and new telecommunication forces our experiences as intrinsically precarious, that we are now entering into these liminal spaces, so to speak, through the internet. The quote from Butler on the screen highlights how technology, through specifically the screen, however, I'm going to extend that to also the speaker, interrupts and even disrupts our lives. Such an impingement contributes to the qualities of instability and unsettledness that constitute precariousness. Cyberspace, including the internet and social media, has been argued as non-spatial and placeless, contributing to the fragmentation of society. I want to offer an alternative way to imagine it, though. Yes, it can fragment and depersonalize social life, but isn't it through these precarities that it also brings us together through shared social experience? If precariousness is a shared feeling and our interactions with technology are, to varying degrees, precarious themselves, then can't cyberspace form connections among people, regardless of where they are physically in the world, connections that come through shared experiences of vulnerability? Instead of mediations through technologies as displacement, it separates, instead of medias of technologies as displacement, i.e. it separates over there from right here, how can we begin to theorize and think about technology as a tool for emplacement, bringing the there here? SlumTV and the socio-technological spaces that they design provide us with ways we can think about this. Through the personal stories they voice, SlumTV connects local, national, and global communities in shared feelings of precariousness and displacement, making Mathare, that there, not so different from here at all. Thank you.